What's up? It's been a while since I've uploaded anything with my voice to YouTube. Much life in music has happened since my Sims alternate reality music scene video, but I can assure you I've been dutifully working away at a video on Kazumi Totaka's Wave Race 64 soundtrack, about 20 minutes of which can be seen at the Biplets Patreon. It's that project which brings me here today, though not because it's done yet. To give you the briefest of context, Wave Race 64 is an early N64 title, essentially made to show off the fact that Nintendo could now simulate 3D waves really well. Its gameplay blew audiences away at conventions, at home, and at various dentist office lobbies across America, which is where I first played it. And it was the type of game that truly ushered in an era of 3D gaming innovation which would reshape the industry. Its soundtrack, however, was surprisingly divisive, especially for Western audiences who weren't used to instrumental fusion jazz. Kazumi Totaka decided to score this game with an incredibly deep series of J-Fusion style songs, which stylistically line up perfectly with the aesthetics of 90s Japan, but which didn't quite feel robust and energetic enough to match 90s Americans' idea of racing music. I'm not just guessing this, reviewers at the time were very clear. Totaka even rearranged some more intense versions of these songs for Nintendo's upcoming Rumble Pack compatible re-release of the game, which includes my favorite video game lick of all time. All of this to say, Wave Race 64 soundtrack is of great interest to me for too many reasons to include here, and so I'm about 80% done with a comprehensive video on it. And while in the process of searching for footage related to Nintendo's 1996 promo cycle, I recently discovered the show Nintendo Mania. Nintendo Mania was a shockingly in-depth video game news program geared towards kids, produced in Mexico, which starred gaming promo legend Gus Rodriguez. It was a full TV program dedicated to upcoming Nintendo games and strategies and secrets, related to already released titles and stuff that's upcoming, and notably ran from 1995 to 2000. Because this show was such a hit, they were very successful in securing interviews with various Nintendo employees like Ken Lobb, and even a convention floor interview with Miyamoto himself. Because it was publicizing Nintendo products in 1996, this show is in the unique historical position of receiving access to beta versions of Wave Race 64, making this my absolute go-to location to find such footage. From about 1995 to 1997, Nintendo was in an all-out media blitz, trying to drum up excitement for their new 3D console. They released an absolutely absurd amount of commercials, magazine pieces, and even official CD soundtracks to be released alongside these games. They also famously brought development copies of games like Mario 64, Wave Race 64, and others to conventions like Space World. The fascinating thing about these demos is that they really weren't finished. In fact, almost everything related to the Ultra 64 was dramatically behind schedule. By convention season 1996, they had hoped to already be shipping consoles and multiple games, but in reality, they had glorified tech demos to show for it. And unfortunately for this company that really doesn't like sharing their internal processes with the outside world, they were forced to show many incomplete copies of things to keep people excited for these upcoming releases. That brings us back to Nintendo Mania. At various points during the show's run, they would share footage of people trying out early draft copies of Wave Race 64, some of which look more like tech demos than others, and some of them looking kinda close to the completed product. In fact, Nintendo Mania seems to have really emphasized this specific test copy of the game, and spent a few minutes having their kid journalist interviewing somebody who's trying it out. And extremely luckily for us, the microphone sounds like it's picking up the ambient noise from the room. That includes the music from this copy of the game.
¿Qué
pasó? Súper, está buenísimo este juego, hijo. Aparte está rapidísimo, está increíble. O sea, no, Nintendo está buenísimo.
Bueno, pues ya vieron sus opiniones y la verdad es que sí está muy bueno.
Let me play that again, and I'll try to EQ it so you can hear the game audio a little bit better.
Para uno o dos jugadores, según como tú quieras jugar, en torneo o en competencia.
¿Qué pasó?
Para uno o dos jugadores, según como tú quieras jugar, en torneo o en competencia.
¿Qué pasó?
It's very hard to make out, but we can tell a few things for sure. There is some harp glissandoing up and down. There is some type of 4 on the floor bass drum beat. And at the end here, it sounds like there might be a beta copy of GoldenEye somewhere else in that room. Now those hits at the end sound extremely Bond-like to me, but since there's no footage or anything else from that game, I guess I'll just be leaving it alone for now. But what about this harp stuff? Well, after searching every release of the Wave Race 64 soundtrack I could find, I could not locate anything resembling it. I also assumed maybe this was a demo track thrown on just for these convention copies, so I took way too deep a dive through various Japanese stock music libraries and couldn't find it there either. I also looked for it in other Totaka games. Nope. So far, I haven't found any bonus tracks in my copy of the Rumble Pack re-release, and nothing turns up for me when I search any terms related to Wave Race 64 beta music. Oh well, at least this guy clearly enjoys the game. However, during their 1996 Media Blitz, it looks like Nintendo released a bunch of their music as compilations. This includes a CD called Original Cuts from the hottest Nintendo games, Super Mario 64 and Wave Race 64. This CD was put together by Nintendo of America, but it looks like it's almost entirely Super Mario 64 music, which makes sense since that game was released first. It's possible they intended to include more Wave Race music, but there just wasn't enough ready yet. The only track related to the game doesn't even have a specific course title, it's just labeled as Wave Race, with no explanation of how it was used or how it fits into the picture at all. And here's that track. We can immediately note that this is the same harp, the same bass drum 4 on the floor pattern in the same tempo, and the opening drum fill plus fusion jazz chords kind of just seem indicative of a Totaka track. So yeah, I'm 99% confident this is the track heard in that 1996 episode of Nintendo Mania. The track also appears as Wave Race on a couple other Nintendo of America compilations. By the way, I got the idea to sift through these because of this video, where a YouTuber recently located a beta version of a Donkey Kong 64 track. In each case, it is strangely about a minute of fusion jazzy electronica, but looped many times. Despite being a very short and somewhat simplistic track, the producers chose to loop this song until it took up 7 minutes 30 seconds of space on the record. This is strange. I would have to guess that this is, again, because Totaka was still working on songs for Wave Race 64, and this may have just been all that was available for Nintendo of America. And if the producers were already slated to release this album as a compilation, maybe they just needed any track whatsoever called Wave Race just to fill their quota. So, this is really a Super Mario 64 soundtrack album with a random bonus demo track. And it looks like that demo track is beta Wave Race 64 music. I believe it was thrown onto these CDs to fill various quotas during Nintendo of America's marketing campaign for the new console. Probably had some audio file lying around that just said Wave Race, and they threw it on here, assuming it would make it into the game. Whether it's an accident or intentional, I think it's at the very least a window to the earlier ideas Totaka may have had for the soundtrack. While the final version's tunes are clearly much more fleshed out J-Fusion style tunes, this song has much more of a racing game background type feel. No particularly strong melodies, just a rhythm section groove with some cool chords and a pedaled bass line. It is absolutely possible this track was also used in showcase situations, like what Nintendo Mania covered, just to gauge early reactions to Totaka's work, so that he can then make adjustments in the soundtrack moving forward. It's also possible this was just something he threw together in an afternoon because Miyamoto needed something last minute. Whatever the case, I haven't seen anything written about this track online, so I figured I'd share my findings before I drop the full video.